Well, we're starting to get some specific quantification, some clear numbers about the impact of voter suppression laws, this time specifically in Wisconsin. There is a lot going on in the news. Trump says he's going to go to Puerto Rico, a country that he used to run a hotel down there, Trump International Hotel in Puerto Rico. When he left, it was bankrupt and it cost the government $30 million, a little more than that, actually. Now, you know, to his credit, I guess, you know, I think it was PolitiFact fact-checked this, and they said when he bought into the hotel or cut a licensing agreement with the hotel in 2008, the hotel was already in financial trouble. He simply asserted that he was going to turn it around, he was going to fix it, and no, he left and it was bankrupt. So, you know, there are people openly wondering if Trump even knows that people in Puerto Rico have U.S. passports, that they're U.S. citizens. Does he even know this? I mean, it's very strange. But back to this. And Graham Cassidy, the Republicans are trying to decide if they're going to have a vote today or not. You know, do they want to get their members on record? Are they have, you know, how many Republicans in the Senate want it known that they wanted to destroy the health care of their state versus how many don't want it known? That's what it's coming down to. It's very strange. But back to this Wisconsin study. This is extraordinary. This was a study that was paid for by the Dane County Clerk's Office, right? You know, one of the major counties in Wisconsin. And it was the survey was administered by the University of Wisconsin Survey Center. So, you know, this is just like straight up, good old-fashioned, clean science, right? This wasn't, you know, some right-wing think tank or, for that matter, some left-wing think tank, if there are any. I guess there's a few. But it wasn't that. It was just a straight-out study. How many people were deterred from voting? In other words, they probably could have voted. In fact, they might have had the right ID to vote, but they decided, you know, it's going to be too much hassle. Sort of like, you know, going through TSA at the airport, you know. Yeah, okay, I really don't want to go through that hassle. I'll take the train. Okay. You know, increasingly from D.C. to New York, that's what people are saying. And you know, for that reason. So that was deterred. And then there were those people who were prevented from voting, who actually showed up to vote and were told, sorry, the law requires we give you a provisional ballot, but the law does not require we count it. So here's a ballot, you can fill it out, mark it up, but we're not going to count it. And in most cases, they didn't tell people that they're not going to count it. And this does not include, because they had no way of finding them or measuring them, this did not include the people who didn't register to vote because they were afraid that they didn't have the right ID. In other words, 100% of the people that I'm about to describe to you who got prevented from voting or were discouraged from voting were already registered. We have no idea how many people didn't register. And in fact, in many of these Republican-controlled states where they're aggressively trying to make it hard to vote, they're also making it hard to register, right? You know, the driver's license bureaus or the places where you can get your ID are, you know, running on a very temporary basis, or, you know, they cut back the hours in the months before, you know, when it's still possible to register to vote. They closed some of them. I mean, this has been going on in the Carolinas and in the Deep South, literally for, you know, decades, maybe centuries, and now it's being done in places like Wisconsin and Michigan and whatnot. So here's what they found. They found that, now, keep in mind, Trump won Wisconsin by 22,000 votes, 22,748 votes. Okay, 22,000. Just looking at two counties, Milwaukee County and Dane County, just looking at these two counties, what they found was that as many as 23,000 people, 23,252 specifically, were deterred from voting. In other words, they, in many cases, actually didn't realize that they had the right ID to vote. But they just, they said, yeah, I voted in the past. These were all people who are registered to vote and who voted in the 2012 election, all of them. And they said, no, I just, I don't think I can get through all this stuff. 23,000 people deterred. They said, no, I didn't vote because I just, it looked like it was going to be a hassle. An additional 14,000 people were actually prevented from voting. They were registered to vote. They showed up to vote. They thought they had enough ID. They didn't. So who was it? So here we've got a total, this is, 23,000 plus 14,000, if my math is right, is 37,000 people. Trump won by 22,000 people. And this is just in 2 counties, by the way. So who was it who was deterred from voting? See, the Republicans, they've known this since 1980. Paul Weyrich was talking about this in 1980, 1981, right? He was saying, and quite frankly, our leverage in the elections goes up as the voting populace goes down. So it's not like, somebody just, woke up on the Republican Party and said, gee, we got to stop poor people, young people, old people, and black people from voting. It was that they've been doing this all along. And frankly, the Democrats before them, at least in the South, at least in a way, directed against people of color. The scripts kind of flipped in the 50s, but frankly, both Democrats and Republicans were just fine with separate but equal and all that kind of thing. But the Democratic Party took a step forward in the mid-60s, and everything changed. So anyhow, who was prevented from voting? Well, it turns out that of the deterred, the burdens of voter ID, I'm quoting from the study itself. This was embargoed until 7 p.m. last night. And it's from Kenneth Mayer, the professor of political science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He said the burdens of voter ID fell disproportionately on low-income and minority populations. Among low-income registrants, and that's people with a household income of under $25,000 a year, 21% were deterred compared to 7% for those making over $25,000. Among high-income residents, if you make over $100,000, only 2.7%, a little over 2% of people said, I'm not sure if I've got the right ID. I know it's going to be a big hassle. Screw it, I'm not going to vote. That was only 2.7% among wealthy people making over 100 grand a year, 21% among people making under 25,000 a year. With regard to the racial breakdown, 8.3% of white registrants were deterred from voting. 27.5% of African Americans were deterred from voting. This, by the way, was based on the statewide database of registered voters, WisVote. As I said, it was administered by the University of Wisconsin Survey Center, funded by the Dane County Clerk's Office. The survey found considerable confusion about the law, they add. Most of the people who said they did not vote because they lacked ID actually possessed a qualifying form of ID. This confusion may be the result of a lack of effective efforts educating eligible voters of the requirements of the law. Well, it's not just a lack of efforts. It's an intention. I mean, they're intentionally trying to confuse people around this. In fact, Mayer, the guy who ran the study, he said the 11.2% figure is actually a lower boundary since it does not include people who didn't even register to vote because they lack an ID. So we know that probably something like 37,000 people just in these 2 counties in Wisconsin were either prevented or deterred from voting. The vast majority of them being low-income people. We don't know statewide because they didn't have the budget to survey everybody in the state. They just did 2 counties, but you can kind of extrapolate from that. The Republicans have got this thing going. The Republicans have got this thing. This is how they're going to win elections. They're going to keep you from voting, especially if you're old enough that you might not drive anymore, and so you haven't kept your driver's license current. Or if you're young enough that you haven't started driving, or you're going to college and you haven't had the need for a driver's license. Or if you're disabled and you can't drive. Or if you just happen to live in the inner city and you don't need to drive,